Welcome back to another episode of Bible Conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about benevolence. Well, we're continuing our series today on the Christian's responsibility. We've covered some important topics, that I get very passionate about, like striving for excellence. Last week, as we had our brother Richard Allen on the podcast to talk about that. We've talked about our service. We've talked about our responsibility to teach. Today, we're talking about our responsibility to benevolence, though. And I've actually found that is not a well-known definition, a well-known word. The idea of helping somebody else is obviously well-known, but actually calling it benevolence. The reason I say this is because there have been times where somebody has come to the church building looking for help, and I'll tell somebody else, I was helping somebody with benevolence today. And they're like,
what does that mean?
You're doing what now? But it's benevolence is the idea of helping somebody else, helping somebody in need. And it really is not limited by anything beyond that. Just the very simple idea of if we are to be benevolent to somebody else, then we are going to help. We are going to give. We are going to do whatever is needed. And so a lot of this will cross over with our discussion of service. But it's more than that, really. We're being benevolent when we give of our financial means. We're being benevolent when we give of our time. We're being benevolent when we give of our physical things. Even when we give the shirt off of our back to somebody else who is in need. That is a matter of being benevolent.
Yeah. I was actually looking up the etymology, the root of the word for benevolence, because I didn't know. And it's kind of an interesting word because you don't, there's nothing in there specifically that is doing good things for others. But the word really is a disposition to do good, right? It's a desire to do good.
Yes.
And it stems from the Latin word benevolentia, which is
very good.
Thank you. I think I said it right. I don't know. Anybody who speaks Latin, let me know. But we're going to say I did it perfectly. It means good feeling, goodwill, kindness. And it comes from two words. The first is bene, which is well, and in Spanish, you have bien, and in French, it's very, very similar.
I was thinking to English, benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then volentem, which is the other portion of that, is the idea is to wish, right? And so it's like to wish well upon somebody.
Okay.
And so benevolence is
the desire to do that,
the desire, and then to do it, right? Is you are being benevolent with somebody, and so it's really interesting. Root word, as most words are, they're interesting in looking at the etymology.
But it's a matter of doing good.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the whole purpose of benevolence. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about, our ability to give, not just, to individuals, right? But also to the church, right? To the work of the Lord. And so there's a few different ways in which we could talk about this. I know you've got something in mind. I kind of want to let you start with it.
I was going to say, I think that kind of goes into the different ways that we are benevolent. Whether it's me doing good for somebody throughout the week, as I see somebody in need and I want to help with that need and I want to fill that need and do good. Or if it's, hey, I'm going to give of my financial means to the church because I know that they're going to be benevolent with those funds. And so those are just different ways that we go about benevolence, whether it's a direct, individual to another individual or kind of indirect, whether it's through the church and honestly through charities.
Yes. Well, and Jesus talks about practicing righteousness before others in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew chapter 6, I believe it is. And, he says, be careful not to practice righteousness before others. If you're doing it for that purpose, it's going to be seen. And so there's one part of it, right? That one-on-one where the goal and the purpose is to help, right? But there's also people who are willing to go above and beyond and do it anonymously, where nobody knows who it was that gave, nobody knows who it was that helped, nobody knows who it was that benefited. They gave.
Yeah.
because they cared and because they loved. And so there's so many different ways to do it.
Think back to our fundraiser that we did, 3 years ago now.
Yeah, I think so.
In the heart of COVID, a lot of our Christian camps were struggling because they had to cancel camps the summer of 2020.
Yeah.
And that's a big financial loss. And so we did a fundraiser in which many of you listening now donated to. Yeah. But there was no credit received for that as those funds were then given on to different Christian camps. There was not a list of people given to those camps as far as who gave to them. Yeah. Instead, it was just, hey, we're here to help. We want to help. And so that's, I think, what you're talking to is you don't give to be seen as righteous. You just give because you know they're in need.
Correct. And that really goes along with what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians.
Yeah.
So 2 Corinthians chapter 9, we often use this to refer to the offering, right? Giving in worship, giving to the church's needs. But really, not only does it apply there, it is applicable there, which is why it's used there, but it applies in all forms and in all ways. Verse 6, the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And so, these verses have been taken out of context, I think, in the mainstream, quote unquote, Christianity. Right?
Yeah, through the prosperity.
The prosperity gospel, it's been completely taken out of context. But what Paul is saying here is not, listen, if you give this much money, you'll receive this much more. Yeah. It's not, if you give these material possessions, you'll receive better material possessions. No,
and it's also not hey, if you'll give this, then you get a better reward from God. Then his grace abounds if you do these good things.
The reality is God has already given us the greatest gift that has ever existed. And for us to have the audacity to think, well, God, I deserve more from you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's already given us his son. He's given us salvation. And we give then because we've already received.
Yeah.
Right.
And so breaking down the idea of whoever sows sparingly reaps sparingly, whoever sows bountifully reaps bountifully. Yeah. Because it can be very confusing. It's like, okay, if I give, I'm going to receive. Like that's what it's seems to be what Paul's saying, but rather it's as you give, your heart is then opened to more of God's love. You are then growing closer to Christ. You are growing closer to God as you open up your heart to those in need. Yeah. And so it's not a matter of like, hey, I'm going to give so I can directly receive either material things or God's grace. That's the easy connections that a lot of false teachers tend to make, but it's as you give, your heart becomes closer to God's heart. You become more like Christ. That's what we're receiving. That's the growth that we're receiving.
And that's so evident when you've given a gift and you've seen somebody's face light up.
Yeah.
Right. You feel good. Like that, you're receiving something in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It may not be physical. It may not be material. It may not be tangible or touchable, but you're receiving something in that moment. Well, the more that you give, the more that you will receive that. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the idea, though, again, that we're going to receive possessions because we give possessions or whatever, that's not what Paul's talking about. This is a spiritual discussion.
Yeah.
It has been a spiritual discussion, for a couple of chapters now. And what he's talking about is this idea of giving for the purpose of giving.
Yeah.
Right? That it's not, you're not doing this to receive a reward. You will receive something in turn. It might be physical. It might not be.
Yeah.
But you're going to receive something. But that's not why we're giving.
Yeah.
We're giving because God loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah.
Not a cheerful receiver.
And we're giving because when we give, we show the love of God and we can direct people back to him and say that he is why I'm doing this. Yeah. I don't do this just because I love you, but I'm doing this because I love you and even more so, God loves you.
Yes, absolutely. And so this idea of giving, when it comes to being benevolent, right? Benevolence. When it comes to helping individuals, there are often times in our life where we will come across somebody who's in need of assistance, right? And part of us wants to help everybody that we come across, and part of us doesn't want to help anybody.
Yeah.
Right? Because we know how much money we have in our bank account, or we know what possessions we have, or whatever the case may be. And what we really have to be willing to do is to decide in our heart what we're going to give, how we're going to give. And part of that is using good judgment and good discretion, right? And so, giving to somebody who you know cannot be trusted, right? And helping them is potentially enabling them, right? Yeah. So we have to be careful that we're not doing that, right? That we're not utilizing the funds, the gifts, the possessions that God has blessed us with.
Yeah. And in that's why we pray for wisdom for the elders of the congregation, for the deacons who are tasked with using the funds that are given, so that they do make best use of those funds that are given to the church. But in the same way, we need to pray for our own wisdom, that we use the things that God has blessed us with on a personal basis to the best use. We don't want to be wasteful. We don't want to be poor stewards of what we've been given. And that goes from not just like even possibly giving to something that would be enabling, but even in the way that you spend your money otherwise. Are you being a good steward of it in that? And so we pray for wisdom on all fronts in the things that are given to the church and how that's going to be used, but also in what God has given to us and in how we use it.
Yeah. Well, and this idea of benevolence, I think we've talked about money so far, which is fair because this has primarily, at least historically, been a monetary discussion, right?
Yeah.
But we can be benevolent with other things. We can be benevolent with our time.
Yep.
And we can be benevolent with resources that are not financial, right? We can be benevolent with our relationships, with our conversation, our communication, with the way that we encourage, right? I mean, there's so many ways in which we can be benevolent that's not just monetary.
Yeah, because there are a lot of people that are in need, but not necessarily in need in terms of finances.
Yes.
And so when you start to think in that way, rather than, hey, who can I give money to? But instead, who is in need and what are those needs?
Yeah.
Then we can seek in terms of how we can meet those needs. Yeah. And that's what benevolence is how to meet the needs, how to do good.
Absolutely. And, I have found, at least it seems to be, that most people that are really wealthy or are well off or are not in financial need don't believe that they have other needs.
Yeah.
Right. They don't believe they have spiritual needs. But people who are physically poor recognize as well that there are probably other needs I have and are more willing to listen. The interesting thing, at least when it comes to, one of the things that you said, which is, how can I help somebody in need and what are those needs? Well, in 2 Corinthians 8, which is just a chapter before, we have the churches around Macedonia, right, that recognized that the church in Jerusalem was in need of assistance, right? So starting in verse 1, chapter 8, verse 1, this is Paul writing to the church in Corinth. He says, "I want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia," right? So he's telling this to the church in Corinth so that they may be encouraged to be giving.
Yeah, it's kind of like, listen to the story about your brethren and how they have given so that you can be encouraged to also give.
And then consider how you can do that. Right?
Yeah.
"For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part." That whole sentence in normal everyday conversation would make no sense.
Yeah. Extreme joy and abundance of joy and extreme poverty.
Abundance of joy, extreme poverty, severe test of affliction.
Yep.
Wealth of generosity, right? There's a lot that's in there. They're going through a hard time.
Yeah.
These churches in Macedonia,
those things typically don't fit together.
They don't fit together. But here they have. Right? They may be having a test of affliction, a severe one, but they're overjoyed at the grace of God.
Yep.
And they may have extreme poverty. And I mean, by that, maybe don't have a meal, right? But they're giving. This is an overflow of wealth of generosity. It says, so for they gave, verse 3, they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord. So this wasn't somebody forcing them to do it, right? It wasn't somebody, holding their face to a fire and saying, you have to give otherwise, right? No, this is, they gave of their own accord.
But then check out verse 4. This is probably my favorite part of the entire passage.
Yes. Begging us earnestly, begging for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. They wanted so bad to participate in this.
Yeah.
They were begging.
It's almost like you can kind of see the conversation that was had, whereas they're saying, hey, we really want to help. And Paul's like, y'all don't have, like take care of yourself. Like you don't have anything to help out with. And they're like, no, we want to help. I'm gonna skip meals tomorrow so that I can give the money that I would spend on that to help the saints in Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Like begging for that opportunity to give, begging for that opportunity to be benevolent. And that's almost where I look at our culture today, and it's like, yeah, I'll give from the overflow. Like if I get a generous bonus on Christmas, like maybe I'll spend a little bit less on my kids' Christmas presents, and then I'll have a little bit extra to give. And it's just so contrary to the personality that we see in terms of giving within Scripture, and really the heart that goes into the giving. And when I think about that heart, I think back to Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5. And there were so many people that were selling their property, selling their possessions, and giving the money to the apostles to then give on to those who are needy, similarly to the way that we give to the church today. So the church can then take that money and provide for those who are needy. But what Ananias and Sapphira did was they sold a piece of land, and then they took a portion of that money and brought it to the apostles, but said they were giving it all. They made it seem as though, hey, we sold all of this land and are giving all of this money. And what happened was they were struck dead. Yeah. They were struck down and died on the spot. And it wasn't because they held a portion back, but it was because they lied about what they were doing. Yeah. They lied about how much they had given from the sale of that property. And so it goes back again to the heart. And hey, I'm doing this because I want to be seen as though I'm looking good. They weren't giving out of their poverty like the church in Macedonia was, but they were lying about how much they were giving. They wanted almost to make it seem like they were giving out of their poverty. Like, hey, this is all that we have from the sale of the land. And that's just not right. And so whether you have abundance or whether you have little, when you give, be honest about it, and in your heart, be true about it.
Give what you can. Give what you're willing to. That's the whole point, right? Is you have to be willing to give. And you know what's really interesting about that section in Acts 5, right? That's Acts 5, 1 through 11. Right before that, in Acts chapter 4 at the end, verse 36 says this: Joseph, who is also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it before the apostles' feet. Mm-hmm. He did exactly what Ananias and Sapphira did, except he didn't keep back any and lie about what he kept back. He gave.
His heart was, I want this to go to somebody else. I want this to go to somebody in need.
And he just gave. Yeah. And if he did keep back, he kept back, but he gave what he gave. There was no deception in it. There was no attempt to seem as if he was holier because he was giving more. It's not about the amount. And that's the whole point. It's not about the amount. Yep. It's about the act of giving itself and the heart that goes into it.
Yeah. I don't think I can speak enough about the heart that goes into it. I mean, whether it's the Church Macedonia, Barnabas, or the poor example of Ananias and Sapphira, the heart that goes into it is of utmost importance, and making sure that you're not doing good deeds. You're not being benevolent. Again, being benevolent in so many different ways, not just monetary, but not doing it to be seen by other people as though, wow, look at what they're doing. But instead, because I genuinely care about showing the love of Christ to someone else. Because that's the core is we give, we are benevolent in order to show the love of Christ to someone else, in order to say, look at why I'm doing this. It's because my God. Yeah.
Whatever you do in word or deed, do as if for the Lord, right? Yeah. The whole purpose of what we do is to serve God. You know, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. It's those ideas that ought to permeate our life, that everything we do is for God. Yep. Our giving, the way we talk, the way we speak, the way we move, right? The actions that we perform, the things we participate in, the things that we watch, everything that we do ought to be for Christ.
Yeah.
And so the heart that we have is so vital. I know just before we started recording, we had talked about the widow's mite. And I think you were on to talk about that in Luke 21.
I was actually just about to pull that up, especially when talking about the amount that is given, because a lot of times that can be a struggle as far as like, okay, well, I don't have much. It's not going to make a difference anyways. Yeah. Or, I have some, but I don't know how much to give because I also want to make sure that I take care of X, Y, Z. I want to make sure I still have something to put into my saving or into my retirement. I want to make sure I still have other things taken care of before I give. So like, how much do I really give? Yeah. But Jesus talks about this widow here, and about her giving. It's found in Luke chapter 21. And, I'm just going to go ahead and read it for us. Once I find my spot, I lost my...
You're good. Verse 1.
Oh, there we go. In verse 1, I was on the next page. Just starting in verse 1. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." Yeah. I mean... Now we start talking about faith.
Yeah.
Now we start talking about reliance on God and not reliance on ourselves. Because when you put in all that you have to live on, you're saying, I don't really know where my next meal will come from. I don't really know how I'm going to be able to take care of my quote unquote needs. Yeah. But it's saying, God, I'm relying on you and I'm not relying on me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we don't hear anything else about this widow. Right. Yeah. So the assumption is that God took care of her.
Yeah.
God provided, right? The other thing I want to point out is Jesus actually, he doesn't condemn anybody in this section. No. Right. So those that are giving out of their abundance are commended for doing so.
Yeah.
What he is saying is that this woman has given everything.
Yeah. She's put in more than all of them.
Yes. And it's not because of the amount. It's because of she understands that everything that she is and everything she has goes to the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we ought to empty our checking and savings account on a Sunday, on every Sunday, and give everything we have. That's not what God is necessarily asking for us to do. But he is asking for us to give liberally, to give freely, to love giving, whether it's financial or whether it is anything else.
Not to hold back and say, I don't know what tomorrow holds, and so I'm going to make sure that I'm financially taken care of tomorrow. Yeah. Instead, it's, I'm gonna go ahead and give. I've taken care of my needs. I've taken care of my family needs. I'm going to go ahead and give the rest. I don't need it. It's not a
building bigger barn situation.
Yeah, exactly. Turning physical possessions or using money as a god in your life.
Yeah.
And man, it's so much more difficult to do than it is to talk about it. To actually live by faith in that way and say, you know what, God holds tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. God holds the next month after this month's paycheck is used up, and see what happens. Because I go back to that story about the guy who is at his house, and there's this flood that's coming through town. It's an old preacher story. You may have heard it before, but this guy is in his house, and the flood waters start to rise and are consuming his house, and so he goes up on the roof to get away from the flood waters, and there's this rescue boat that comes by, and they're like, "Hey, get on. We're here to take you away. You're going to drown if you just stay here. The flood waters are going to continue to rise." And he says, "No, it's okay. God's going to take care of me." Yeah. And so they go on, and then a little bit later, he's like up on top of the chimney. The flood waters are rising. He's getting to the highest point he possibly can, and another boat comes by, and he's like, "No, I don't need rescue. God's going to take care of me." And then eventually, he's like standing on top of the chimney. The flood waters are coming up onto his legs, to his knees, and up to his waist. And a helicopter comes by, dropping down a ladder and saying, "Climb up. Let us help you. Let us save you." And he says, "No, God's going to take care of me. It's okay." Yeah. And then the man eventually drowns, and he gets to heaven. He's like, "God, I thought you were going to take care of me." And he said, "I did. I sent 2 boats and a helicopter, and you didn't listen to any of my rescue attempts." And so I tell that story in a sense of, a lot of times when we say that we need to be reliant on God, absolutely. And he does that in ways that we may not see. Sometimes our reliance on God is saying, he has blessed me with this job. in which it blesses me with a paycheck, in which I can take care of my family and take care of the things that they need and put food on the table. And so we have to understand all of these blessings come from God. It's not like I'm saying get rid of your paycheck because tomorrow God's going to bless you with another one magically. No, he's already blessed you with that job and with that paycheck. But we still have to be liberal in our giving from what he has already blessed us with.
Yes. We have to be good stewards. And that means good stewards in giving, and it means good stewards in saving, right? Like we have been given, we have institutions today that allow us to prepare for the future. Right. And we don't prepare for the future in order to store up and create bigger barns. Our preparation for the future ought to be that we have enough to live on and we can give liberally still. Right? That when we're unable to work, we can still give. We can still provide for others. We're taken care of, but we can take care of others as well. We can provide, we can give, we can be generous.
And when it comes to the widow's mite and the Church of Macedonia, when you're thinking, hey, I could either choose to provide for myself a little bit more, or I could choose to give, I think the commandment's clear. The instruction's clear. We don't provide for ourselves all the more. Instead, we give all the more.
Yeah, absolutely. We are commanded to be benevolent.
And
it's such an important part of a Christian's walk is to be benevolent, to be giving, to want to do good for others. Right? So not just for ourselves.
I do want to tell one more story as we close this out. When it comes to giving within the church. I've noticed a trend over even my entire lifetime, 25 years. There was actually something that was told to me by a missionary as he was going around different congregations trying to raise funds, trying to raise support, saying, I want to go into all the world. I want to build up his kingdom. And he was asking a congregation for support. And the response from that congregation was, we'd love to support you, but we just don't have the funds to do so. And here's why. He said the members who were giving $50 every Sunday 50 years ago are still today giving $50 every Sunday. And the church is having to take care of their expenses, having to take care of their needs, their benevolence in their communities. And they didn't have anything to give to this missionary. And so the reason I tell this story is for people to consider and evaluate what their benevolence is, because as times change and as cultures change and as inflation rises, quite honestly, we have to be constantly evaluating what we're giving and what we're allotting to our benevolence and to our giving.
Absolutely. Well, I don't really have anything else.
I'm all good on this topic, but thank y'all so much for listening to us. Please stick around for just a few more minutes so you can see how you can help us.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Bible Conversations. We want to ask if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments that you please email us at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We've got a Facebook page as well as an Instagram account. Our Facebook page is very simple. It's just Bible Conversations. On Instagram, it's very simple, @Bible Conversations. Look us up, like our posts, and share it with your friends.
We also have an opportunity for you to help us financially through a store via Kim's Closet. And you can find that. You can just type into Google Kim's Closet. We have a link as well that we will be posting in each of our episodes, and we just hope that you will reach out and find us and purchase a hoodie or a shirt with the logo on it, and that way you can spread the word without having to say a word. So we appreciate you. Thank you all. Have a blessed week.